Hello world of YouTube and welcome to my Silversun Pickups Discography Review Update. In this part, I'm going to be talking about the new record by Silversun Pickups, Better Nature. If you want to see my part 1 of this now 2-part Silversun Pickups Discography Review, it's first link in the other thingy, but I'm not doing this alone. I am joined, once again, by fellow music reviewer, podcast compadre, dude out in California, Mark of Spin Reviews. Welcome back to the channel.
Woo! Back for part 2. Let's get this done.
So, before we really get into the record, since I've done the discography, I more wanted to know kind of your thoughts broadly about the discography, maybe your favorite record and your least favorite as a whole.
Well, I'm not going to reiterate what you spent 20 minutes talking about a couple years ago. My thoughts are pretty similar to yours, and especially with Neck of the Woods. I thought that was a fantastic album, really bringing together a lot of what they've done over the last couple and bringing in more of those sleek electronic elements. And I'm going to go more into my thoughts on them in general when I talk about what I liked or didn't like about certain aspects of this album, Better Nature. But yeah, for you guys watching who might not know, because I've never really posted a video about Silversun Pickups before, just basically the same as him.
Well, thank you for making things a lot easier and kind of compacting your review and with your opinion about their discography. But before we really dive into things about the new record, I did want to kind of touch on a small thing, a small track that was on their singles collection, because it isn't technically a single. It was, but it wasn't. But it has something to do with this new record, and that's the song Cannibal that came out on their singles collection, A-Sides collection that came out last year. And before I talk about my opinion on it, I wanted to know a little bit about what you thought about it.
Well, honestly, I'm a little ambivalent about that song, and it actually kind of relates to one of my few gripes about Better Nature. I do really love the chorus of that song, but really it's kind of ruined for me because every other moment of it, like in every single 4 count, we get this thing in there that they're like trying to beat into your head as a hook, but it just makes the song feel broken to me. Like, it just does not sound good. It gets really annoying after a while. And that song, when that came out, it was like, oh, I was not expecting the song they released after Neck of the Woods to not really rub me the right way 100%, but yeah, I kind of go either way on that one, honestly.
I can see why you would think that, and I can see that complaint, but I don't necessarily agree completely, because first of all, I like that Cannibal introduces this very electronically driven sound. They take the electronics on Neck of the Woods and expand them, and like the single that came out before Neck of the Woods, this kind of helps bridge their sound from Neck of the Woods to this new album, because it is incredibly dance-driven and electronic-driven. Not dance-driven, but electronic-driven, and I love that aspect of the song, and I like the little creeping noises and all that sort of stuff, especially that weird droning noise. I think it works, but I will say that it isn't necessarily the strongest track they've released that may have been recorded during the sessions for this new record, or that inspired it.
Yeah, and I feel like it was just like a little bit of experimentation to like put on the Greatest Hits album that was like the last thing in the record contract before they decided to self-release for this new album, Better Nature. King of the segues right here.
Yeah, so speaking of Better Nature, now that we've gotten the transitional track out of the way, what exactly did you think of this record?
Well, this doesn't really top Neck of the Woods for me. I thought that was a fantastic album all the way through. And this kind of relates to my thoughts on Better Nature. One of like the secret weapons of Silversun Pickups to me is in their rhythm section, in like the grooves that they put into a lot of the songs. It was definitely a main aspect in the first 2 albums, especially with the song like Lazy Eye, which has almost like an iconic groove to it, which is something that not a lot of people can really claim to have. But on Neck of the Woods, when they threw in those electronics and kind of shied away from more of the 90s alt-rock aspects of their sound, went to more of like an indie sort of synthy pop kind of thing, while definitely still keeping a lot of the rock stuff in there, making it a lot more sleek, it really emphasized that aspect of the band, and it helped make these songs like some of their most enjoyable, some of their most hook-filled, and even the songs that go on for 5-6 minutes, which is most of them on that album, don't really run long just because you can go along with that groove for a lot of it. Now, compared to here, I feel like it doesn't really work out as well in certain parts of it. Like, sometimes a song might feel a minute too long. Like, the song Friendly Fires kind of rises and falls so much that it kind of loses any kind of momentum for me. But then we get other songs like Connection, which sort of takes this aspect in like a whole other direction. It goes a little more dancey while still keeping the soul and the great riffs.
I definitely agree with that. I do feel like some of these songs run a little long. The closer on this album, The Wild Kind, incredibly great synths. Love the atmosphere, love the textures, but it drags on for just like a minute and a half too long. They drag out the guitar line so much in that song.
Honestly, I think it's too long too, but I think they should have just sliced off the first 1.5 minutes. The rest of it is just so fun. Like, they've never really had a closer that's fun before. Like, they've always had like kind of the drawn out epic thing, which is kind of what they were going for in the first half. But then once it kicked in with that, like, it was almost like a rockabilly chord progression, but with the Silversun pickups indie rock sound, and I just thought that was a really interesting hybrid that made for something really, really cool.
I can agree with that. I do like how this closer feels a bit more like a Silversun pickups closer. I'm going to put that in quotes because, like you said, on Swoon and on Carnivas, not really on Neck of the Woods, but on Swoon and Carnivas, they had these closers that felt thematically like the end. Like, even lyrically, this didn't feel much like a thematically lyrical end, but as a whole, the track has this sense of finality to its soundscape, and I like that. I just feel like it just kind of drags on for just a little too long. But I love everything that's in the song, so I'm kind of torn with it because I like it, but I don't.
Yeah, and I think that going back to my point earlier, because things aren't really quite as groove-driven, I feel like, on this album, and I know I'm exhausting this word, and I'm going to try to stop using it more, but while this album doesn't really has that 5-minute average to it, which is pretty much the same as with their first three, I feel like the songs tend to ramble a bit. Like, a few of them, like, could have been cut to, like, 4.5. And in fact, my 3 favorite songs on this album, or at least 3 of my top 5, are the shortest, even if the third shortest is at 4.5 minutes. Those being Circadian Rhythm, Latchkey Kids, and Connection.
See, I personally didn't really like some of the shorter tracks on this record. Like, I really didn't like Latchkey Kids. That was my least favorite song on the record because I feel like it didn't really do anything, and it sounded kind of like a Swoon influence jam. I felt like what they were adding to the record didn't really play out well on here. Really, the one thing that kind of felt like the rest of the record on Latchkey Kids was the twinkling guitars. I felt like sonically it just kind of stuck out like a sore thumb amongst tracks like Connection or Tapedeck or Ragamuffin, which is my favorite song on the record, that are incredibly electronic driven, and I feel like the grooves are there. I just feel like they're not the same. The only track to me that felt like it had that Silversun pickups bass and drum vibe, like I talked about in the discography, was Pins and Needles. That bass line and that drum line, they lock so well together, and the groove I felt like is very tight on that song, but that's the only song that has the groove that is more akin to the rest of their discography.
You know, I think this is where our opinions are gonna split off a little, because, again, Latchkey Kids was one of my favorites. I just thought, like, it wasn't really the most experimentally incredible song on here, and it did kind of call back to the earlier stuff, I'll give you that, but I did think it was really catchy. It's a really solid song. If anything, I think the one song here that does really recall their earlier stuff, which is why I think they released it as the lead single, is Nightlight. It kind of has that, like, kind of thing to it, even though in the chorus it does go for something a little more directly anthemic with the, "We want it!"
Yes. Well, I definitely agree. In my notes, I kind of said that Nightlight sounded like a hybrid of Carnivas and Neck of the Woods, because it had that tone and that instrumentation of Carnivas with the atmosphere of Neck of the Woods. One of the things I love about Neck of the Woods that I didn't really touch about in my review, or I did, was the more foreboding atmosphere is very present on that record. and it's there on Nightlight, but in a similar way, but it's combined with the stylings and the more alt-rock centric instrumentation of Cannibal. So I definitely agree with that statement, and I think that was a great lead single because I love Nightlight. It's a great song.
Yeah, and I'm still kind of undecided on whether I want to put it in that top 5, but it was definitely a good choice because it led people in like with a pretty non-alienating song. I think it was a good decision. But Ragamuffin, going back to that song, that was one of my favorites too. I think it's my second favorite according to my list here. That's probably where the more experimental elements like really take shape in a great way with the electronics work and how it builds. That and Tapedeck are like the 6-minute songs that I feel really justify that.
See, I'm torn because I like Ragamuffin a lot. It actually reminded me a lot of the Jamie XX record that came out this year, In Color. The way the electronics sound in that, it almost akins more to this electro artist than it does anything that they've done before, and I love that. I love how the vocals from Brian are looped back and forth on a delay, like while he's continuing to sing. It has a great atmosphere. It's an incredible jam. Whereas Tapedeck, I felt like it was Silversun pickups trying to be Imagine Dragons.
What?
Because, no, not new Imagine Dragons. Night Vision's Imagine Dragons. Because...
Still!
It has that instrumentation that's a bit quirky. It has the vocals... sounded like Brian, but it sounded like he was also trying to invoke similar emotions that Imagine Dragons did on tracks from their first record. I also did, and also made the lyrical themes of ghosts and spirits that are throughout the record stick out a bit more harshly in like not a good way, because I don't mind the lyrical themes of nature amongst all these electronics. I kind of think that's a cool dichotomy to have more ghost and spiritual sounding lyrics with all these electronic based songs, but I feel like on this song in particular, it just kind of drags on too long and meanders a bit. The ending is kind of unnecessary, and I didn't really like its progression. As like I said, it kind of felt like a weird Imagine Dragons styled song, and it just didn't sit with me.
Honestly, that's in her one of my favorites. I think that our lists are going to be significantly different, even though we seem to have similarly positive opinions about the album in general. I just really loved like the cool like piano hooks. It had an interesting sound to them, and I actually really like the transition into that rollicking last chorus toward the back half. I thought that was kind of a cool like second way of approaching that same chorus. And I don't know, I just think it kind of it's another one of those songs that uses that tightness of Neck of the Woods in new, interesting ways. And you know, one song that really also does that in a different way, and my personal favorite on here is Circadian Rhythms.
I liked Circadian Rhythms. I think it did a good job of that, but one thing I liked about Circadian Rhythms a lot was that Nikki is singing. She has predominant vocals. Like, in my discography review, I stated that I wanted more Nikki-driven songs. And I was so happy to hear her sing on this, because, like, on Pikel, she had her own song. And she's had her own songs, like, in bits, but, like, not like this again. And it was awesome. I liked the song Circadian Rhythms, but when I heard that was what really stuck out with me.
Finished fanboying?
I'm sorry! I like this band, and I like when they utilize their members to their fullest.
I know, and actually, you know, that and a couple other songs are like, I love there is a bit more vocal interplay on this compared to maybe just a little more on Pikel, but I think this is the most like vocal interplay there's done, especially on Circadian Rhythms, which, by the way, for like the first few days, I could not stop pronouncing as Canadian Rhythm.
That's great. That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree. There's a lot more vocal interplay. Like, the other members also have more backing vocals, which I enjoy. Like I said, I like that it's not like I like Brian's voice. I think he's great, but I like that they're utilizing the other members for more than just instrumentation.
But yeah, I just love that like infectious like pop swing it has to it. It's definitely an approach that they've never taken before, but given that Silversun Pickups definitely are one of the indie rock bands that more know their way around a hook, it actually was a really good fit for them, and I'm kind of surprised they didn't do a song like this earlier. And I'm not sure if this is quite as infectious as like, I don't know, Lazy Eye or The Pit or something like that, but I definitely put it like on that level.
I would agree with that. And it is the second single from the record, so like it's obviously, if it has appeal, it's gonna show, because it has that potential to be a single, and it is, and so I think it's gonna spread because it is one of the more infectious songs on the record. On a record filled with a lot more atmosphere and grooves, but electronic grooves, this is one of the ones that's gonna stand out and really sell the record as a whole, if we're talking business-wise.
You gotta make that money.
Gotta make that.
You gotta make that money.
You gotta make the money, guys. You gotta make the money.
Podcast listeners, shout out one time. But, you were talking about lyrics earlier, and I'll admit I didn't really pick up that many themes from it. From what I'm hearing, it sounds like you got a lot out of it. But there are a couple songs I did want to point out lyrically. Connection being a main one. It sort of has that internet generation commentary to it, and it does get a little more on the nose in the second verse, but the first verse, I kind of like the way they tackle, from what I'm interpreting, like, slacktivism. Like, it's sort of talking about people throwing a parade to celebrate doing something without them actually doing something, and it's sort of like how people can act all self-righteous just because they made a hashtag trend.
I definitely agree with that. I think it also tackles, because mostly Silversun pickup songs are kind of just dreary things with lots of dreary imagery, and that's present on here, but Connection is one of the songs on here that expands their lyrical prowess to something a bit more thought-provoking, which I like. I like to see. I like to see that they're trying to write music that's enthralling and that is pushing their own creative boundaries, not just from a soundscape perspective, but from a lyrical perspective.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting going into the lyrics on, because I've never really thought about the lyrics on Silversun Pickups albums before. Like, it's always just been, like you said, cool imagery and lyrical wordscapes, if that's a word. But in general, it's always kind of fallen back on the voice, the cool instrumentation, and all that. And even just all that was enough to make Neck of the Woods and some of their stuff, so fantastic.
Would you say you had any other huge, glaring issues with the record? Because you said you had one when you were talking about Cannibal. And would you say that, where exactly does that carry over into here, and do you have any others that are really weighing on you?
This is weird, because Neck of the Woods has the same producer as Better Nature, but I think a lot of it lies in the production, and that overproduced isn't the right word, but it's like, there are some songs where they throw a lot into the mix to the point where it can get kind of cluttered. Honestly, Pins and Needles was kind of an example of that for me, even though I know you love that song. Friendly Fires just had this really awkward sounding build-up, which was literally nothing but a synthesizer and one clap happening on the beat. And in general, there was just some kind of bizarre decisions like that. Kind of going back to Cannibal, where they had that guitar thing in there. Some of it just kind of feels like it could have used another look to make it a little more tight, a little more succinct in the mix.
I would agree to that, but I feel like in some instances on the record, it works well. Pins and Needles. I like the chorus of Pins and Needles, at least. I think that there's a thundering, I don't know if it's a bass or it's just the kick, there's a low end that accentuates the chorus in a way that works. The rest of the song may feel a little tight and compact, but the chorus works, and I think that it's a great part of that production that you described working in its favor. What do you think, or I guess since I don't score and I won't be giving a score because I'm that guy still, I know you score, Mark. What would you give this record a score of out of 5? 10?
Don't you ARTV me. But yeah, at first I was kind of teetering on the edge between a 7.5 and an 8, but there actually are enough really great moments on here that even though I don't consider it their best album, I'd still put Neck of the Woods above it, and I'd maybe put this on the same level as a Swoon or a Carnivus. I still think I'm going to give it a 7.5.
And for where it sits with me in his discography, because he did that and I didn't ask you to, but I wanted you to. Thank you, Mark. You read my mind, and that was awesome. I would set this record below Neck of the Woods, but above Carnivus and above Swoon. I feel like if you want to get into this band and you haven't yet, and you haven't seen my discography review, I would check this out after Neck of the Woods, because I feel like they have such a smooth transition for the discography. If you started here, it would make the rest of their catalog sound a little disjointed, because this record does a great job of combining a lot of their sounds on certain tracks from other records. Like this track borrows from Swoon, that one borrows from Cannibal. They all kind of borrow from Neck of the Woods and mesh them together into this really cohesive record. It's at least cohesive, and it works really well. So what would you say is your favorite song, along with some other favorites sprinkled in there? Okay. Well, my favorite song, as I stated, was Ragamuffin, with other highlights going to Nightlight, Friendly Fires, the opening track, Cradle, which I didn't even touch, but I love that song, and Connection as well. What would you say is your least favorite song on the record?
So I know that these are two of your favorites, but honestly, Friendly Fires and Pins and Needles just back to back were the ones that kind of left the least impression on me, or they're at least the ones that I see myself going back to the least. There are good elements of them, but they kind of showed some of the elements of the album that I wasn't as much of a fan of.
My least favorite song was Latchkey Kids, for the fact that it kind of just didn't. It actually kind of reminded me of Panic Switch, which I know they've had songs on. They had a song on Neck of the Woods that reminded me of it, but the way its guitar line sounded, I was like, this doesn't really add anything. Like, the rest of this record adds something to their catalog. This really didn't, and it just kind of felt like autopilot to me. So that's why I didn't really like it. Okay, so that's our thoughts on the new Silversun Pickups record. What did you guys think about it? I don't normally ask this, but hey, I like to know things, and I think if you want to share, feel free to. If you also want to check out Mark's channel, it is linked in the description. We also do a podcast together every now and then that you guys should go check out.
Yep, that is the podcast show with me, Mark, Spinner Reviews, Johnny over there, Viralrak, and ARTV, John. You know, you might know that guy, you know. We might have someone else on in the future, maybe a guest every now and then, but yeah, and for the most part, it's the three of us just talking music, talking whatever comes up in our crazy, wacky, tangent-filled conversations. You get bits, you get Gree record exec Mark Wahlberg, you get it all. What more could you ask for?
It's, like you say, it's a good music podcast for people who like good music podcasts. But he also reviews music and he does interviews. You should check out Mark's channel. He's a pretty good guy to go watch. I know I talk about music every now and again, and you guys like my opinions, but I'm not the only opinion out there. Mark's got one. John's got one. Hell, Tony in the corner has one.
This record kicks ass.
You do you, Tony. You do you. But you guys have good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day. Say goodbye, Mark.
I'll see you in the next episode of Spin Reviews.